They pulled Lyle off my assignment at 6 in the morning. Sector Command called it a reallocation. Processing backup needed at the Mariposa port of entry. Bodies shifted where bodies were needed. Lyle Meacham had been my tunnel partner for 3 years, and in that time he had never been yanked for port duty. He was a tunnel man. Same as me. You do not put tunnel men behind a desk checking passports during interdiction season unless someone wants them somewhere else. I drove out to the site alone. The tunnel entrance sat behind a collapsed ranch shed, a quarter-mile east of Nogales, Arizona. Flat scrub desert, gravel and creosote bush, indistinguishable from any other quarter-acre between there and Tucson except for the DEA seizure tape and a surveyor's flag planted by Army Corps. The Drug Enforcement Administration had taken the tunnel 2 weeks earlier during an interdiction op on the Mexican side. After a cartel bust, the process was routine. Seize the tunnel, flag it for demolition, pass it to Customs and Border Protection for pre-demo structural clearance. My job was to walk the full length, photograph every feature, flag any remaining contraband, document the engineering profile, and hand the report to the Army Corps team that would collapse it. I had done it 40, maybe 50 times in 12 years with CBP. Tunnel Entry Team, Nogales Sector. We went underground, documented what the cartels built, came back up and wrote the report. Most tunnels were crude, hand-dug, reinforced with stolen lumber, abandoned after a single season of drug runs. My surface man, Tony Davies, sat topside in a CBP truck with a radio and a thermos. I clipped the hardline comm spool to my belt, ran the wire to the relay box at the tunnel mouth, tested the signal, and started down. Protocol for a map tunnel with a solo entry was simple. The surface man monitored the hardline feed, and if the line went dead, he called for extraction. The whole job was supposed to take 3 hours. 6 meters down the access shaft, I hit the horizontal passage and turned south toward the border. Cartel construction. Plywood sheeting braced against the walls. Railroad ties stolen from a siding near Rio Rico holding up the ceiling. A modified dryer duct running overhead for ventilation. Dead battery-powered lanterns hung every 20 meters on bent nails. My headlamp caught the usual rubble. Food wrappers, crushed water jugs, a stained mattress shoved into an alcove where the digging crew had slept between shifts. The packed earth floor was scored with drag marks from the bundles they had hauled through. Width ran about 1.5 meters. Height just under 2. A crouch walk for most of it, which puts a burn in your thighs after the first 100 meters that never fully lets up. I measured as I went. Laser rangefinder for distance. Digital camera for profile shots. Compass bearing logged every 30 meters. The tunnel angled slightly west as it crossed under the border fence. I felt the grade shift in my knees, the subtle downhill lean that meant we were passing under the reinforced zone. Then the passage leveled out. According to the DEA seizure map, the known run was roughly 300 meters, running from the sealed shaft on the US side toward the Mexican entry point. At 300 meters, the tunnel kept going. The plywood bracing gave way to poured concrete. The railroad ties ended, replaced by steel I-beams bolted into the walls on 12-inch centers. The dryer duct disappeared, and rigid aluminum ventilation tubing took its place. The grade of construction had jumped 2 full categories in the space of 10 meters. Someone with serious engineering resources had extended the tunnel far beyond the cartel's work, and they had done it on a timeline that suggested unlimited funding, a deadline that justified anything, or both. I tried the hardline. Tony came through broken and thin. His voice washed in a low electronic drone that had no business existing in a dead tunnel. I told him I was continuing past the mapped section. Whether he caught the full message, I do not know. The line hissed once, clicked twice, and went soft in my ear. The passage widened. The ceiling rose until I could stand upright for the first time since the access shaft. Concrete walls, smooth and recently poured, carried conduit channels along the base with insulated wiring inside. Whoever built this section did it fast, but they spent real money doing it. Then I saw the door. Steel. surgical grade. Sealed pressure assembly, rubber gasket around the frame, recessed electronic keypad mounted at chest height. The whole thing had been welded into a steel frame anchored to the earth with expansion bolts. Permanent installation, load-bearing, built to hold a pressure differential. The keypad was smeared with something. Blue-black, partially dried, thick enough to have run in streaks down the face of the panel and crusted between the keys. I leaned in. I had worked border enforcement for over a decade. I had seen every shade of dried blood a human body produces, from fresh arterial red to old brown black. This carried a deep indigo tint and sat on the metal with an oily, resinous sheen human blood does not have. I drew my sidearm, Sig Sauer, standard CBP issue, pressed my back against the wall beside the frame, tested the keypad with my left hand. The smeared fluid had shorted something in the electronics. The lock disengaged on the first press. The gasket sighed as the seal broke. I should have gone back. The hard line was failing. I had no partner, and I was standing in front of a sealed installation built under federal land by someone whose engineering capacity dwarfed anything the cartels could field. Correct procedure was retreat, report, and hand it off to a tactical unit. But if this connected to a larger network, if the Army Corps demo team collapsed the upper tunnel without knowing what was behind the door, we would bury the evidence and never catalogue it. That was the reasoning I used. Good reasoning. The kind that sounds airtight when you are 400 meters underground with your weapon drawn and your blood running hot. I pushed the door open and went through. The corridor on the other side was built to last. Steel-reinforced walls, caged industrial light fixtures, a generator circuit running somewhere deeper in the complex. The air was cool and dry, circulated by machinery. Cables ran along the ceiling in zip-tied bundles, power, data, and what looked like fiber optic line. The poured concrete floor was clean, recently swept, and dustless. Storage alcoves lined both sides, surgical kits in sealed wrap, collapsible IV stands, drug refrigerators on battery backup, their indicator lights green, boxes of trauma shears, retractors, bone saws, hemostatic clamps, all still packaged, all medical grade. The packing labels said, Meridian Applied Sciences. Each one was stamped with a government contract prefix I recognized from interagency procurement forms, defense appropriation, classified program funding, buried beyond public audit. A defense-funded medical installation had been built under the Arizona desert, accessible through a cartel tunnel my own agency had flagged for demolition. I photographed the supply alcoves, the labels, the contract numbers, kept the SIG up, kept moving. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and I stopped in the doorway. 3 operating tables had been welded end-to-end in a T-shape, their bases bolted to the concrete floor with lag anchors. A single body lay strapped across them, secured at 8 points with heavy nylon webbing cinched tight over a frame too broad, too long, and too wrong in its proportions to belong to anything born on this planet. The thing on the tables had 6 limbs. Its torso was wider and flatter than a man's, tapering toward a head that sat low between heavy shoulder structures. The limbs, I'll call them arms because I had no better word, jointed at what might have been elbows and wrists, but the angles were wrong for human anatomy. Each arm ended in a hand with too many long, thin fingers the color of wet slate. Surgical bandages wrapped 3 of the 6 limbs and a section of the lower torso. The dressings were soaked through with the same blue-black fluid I had found on the keypad. Saturated cloth clinging to anatomy I could not map onto anything I knew. The arms twitched, each at its own rhythm, as though separate nervous systems were firing at separate speeds underneath the same skin. The fingers on the unbound hands had curled around surgical instruments left within reach. A retractor, a clamp, a scalpel that one limb kept turning against its palm in a slow, absent rotation, the blade catching red-amber light each time it came around. Nobody had cleared the tools from the operating field. Nobody had thought about what 6 hands could do with sharp steel if the nylon webbing gave. The creature's thorax expanded and contracted in a labored cycle, visible and effortful, the bandages tightening with each expansion and sagging loose as the body settled. 2 large dark eyes, set wide in that low-slung head, tracked me from across the room. Wet and unblinking, fixed on the doorway where I stood. I put a wall behind me and swept the chamber with the SIG. Surgical trays on rolling carts, monitoring equipment I had never seen in any field hospital or trauma bay, screens displaying waveforms that did not correspond to human vitals. IV lines feeding clear fluid into veins that ran blue-black under translucent skin. Portable generators against the far wall, cabled together in a daisy chain that powered the whole bay. Along the base of the operating tables, flexible ducts pumped refrigerated air across the body. Condensation beaded on the metal rails. Someone had written "Keep" below 16C on a strip of white tape stuck to one duct housing. When the nearest generator hiccuped and the cold flow faltered, the creature's limbs went rigid for half a second. Then the refrigeration kicked back in and the twitching resumed. The room had the haphazard density of an emergency field station, everything hauled in fast and bolted down wherever it fit. The chamber was empty except for me and the thing on the tables. A door opened on the far side. A man in surgical scrubs and nitrile gloves stepped through, mid-50s, grey stubble on a heavy jaw, moving with the uneven gait of someone who had worked consecutive shifts and stopped keeping count. He saw my headlamp first and raised a hand against the glare. "About goddamn time. I told Beckett we needed another pair of..." He saw the badge. The CBP shield clipped to my tactical vest. His hand dropped to his side. "Who sent you down here?" "Customs and Border Protection." I kept the SIG on the creature because that was the threat I could see. "Tunnel entry team, Nogales sector. I need your identification and authorization right now." The surgeon stared at my badge the way you would stare at wreckage from the wrong disaster. He stepped backward and pulled a 2-way radio from a cart beside the nearest operating table. "We have a compromise on the tunnel side. 1 agent, CBP, armed." He listened. Whatever came back through the radio changed his face. The fatigue stayed, but resignation settled behind it. He looked at me the way you look at someone already written off. "You need to leave this facility immediately. This is a classified federal recovery operation, and you do not have clearance." "I have jurisdiction over every tunnel that crosses the border in my sector. Federal statute. Show me authorization or step aside." The overhead lights shifted. The white industrial fixtures cut to a red-amber wash that turned the surgical bay the color of old rust. Somewhere deeper in the complex, a pneumatic seal fired, a heavy pressurized thud that carried through the concrete walls. Another fired behind me. The supply corridor doors cycled in sequence. Steel on steel, locks engaging. The route back to the pressure door was being segmented and sealed. Then boots. Multiple sets moving fast, growing louder. The surgeon backed through the far door without another word. I heard him in the corridor beyond, talking fast on the radio. A second pneumatic seal cut his voice off. I had maybe 2 minutes before armed personnel reached the chamber. Behind me, the way I had come was broken into locked compartments between the surgical bay and the cartel tunnel. Forward was stupid. Backward was sealed. Somewhere ahead, there had to be a shaft, a freight elevator, a vehicle ramp, something that connected this installation to the surface. They had not hauled generators, operating tables, and refrigerated medical equipment through a cartel crawl space. I went forward, past the operating tables, past the creature whose dark eyes followed me across the room without a sound, through the door the surgeon had used. The corridor beyond split left and right. I took the left branch, moving fast, weapon up, and the footsteps behind me doubled in volume. The left branch ran through the facility's deeper sections. Same steel-reinforced walls, same caged light fixtures, everything washed red-amber under the alert lighting. I passed holding areas built from shipping containers sunk into excavated earth, corrugated walls reinforced with welded steel plate, observation slits cut at chest height, industrial padlocks on doors designed to secure ocean freight. Every container had a cooling line bolted to its roof. Every line fed from the same refrigerated trunk running along the corridor ceiling. Several had handwritten warning tags zip-tied to the valves. Maintain cold flow, prevent heat spike. Do not interrupt thermal control. Through the first slit, I saw a body, alien, smaller than the one on the operating tables, curled on its side in the bare interior, 4 limbs folded tight against its torso, the remaining 2 extended flat on the concrete floor. Motionless, dead or sedated so deeply that the distinction was academic. The second container held something alive. Through the observation slit, I watched another specimen, taller, broader, upright and pressing its limbs against the container walls in a slow, rhythmic cycle. Each limb pushed against a different surface, floor, walls, ceiling, testing the material, measuring resistance. A ceiling vent above the door coughed, pushing a wave of warmer air into the container. The creature stopped. Every limb locked against its surface, body held in absolute stillness until the cold line kicked back in. Then it resumed pressing. The padlock hasp was bolted to brackets welded onto a frame anchored in packed earth. Every time the creature pushed, the anchor bolts shifted a 1/4 inch in their seats. The assembly was built for shipping weight, stacked crates, palletized cargo. It was being asked to contain 6 limbs braced against every surface, pushing from all directions at once. The bolts were losing. I kept moving. The corridor widened into a chamber 15 meters across, maybe more, with a vaulted ceiling shored by steel crossbeams. The space was divided down the middle by function. One side held storage and staging. The other side held disposal. On the staging side, military-grade evidence crates, olive drab, stacked 3 high on wooden pallets. I cracked the nearest one. Inside, packed in custom-cut foam, sat fragments of wreckage, twisted metallic components with no identifiable manufacture, scorched panels of a material that looked almost geological but weighed close to nothing when I lifted a piece, a tapered structural element that might have been a rib or spar, impossibly thin, with the same blue-black stain baked deep into its grain. Crash rubble. Aircraft wreckage that did not correspond to anything I had ever processed salvage paperwork for in 12 years of border work. Beside the wreckage crates on a separate pallet sat confiscated cartel weapons, AK pattern rifles, ammunition cans, bundled US currency still in shrink wrap. Every item tagged with a CBP custom seizure label. I pulled one of the tags and studied it under my headlamp. The format was correct. Proper form number, proper field codes, proper chain of custody signature blocks. The seizure number was fabricated. The date was off by 6 months. The authorizing agent's name belonged to nobody I knew, and I knew every agent in Nogales sector by name and badge number. Someone was laundering alien crash rubble through the border enforcement evidence pipeline, hiding it in plain sight inside fabricated cartel seizures, filing it alongside real confiscated weapons, so an auditor would see exactly what the system expected. The disposal side of the chamber was a pit, roughly 4 meters square, dug into the earth floor and lined with scrap metal sheeting. Inside lay the charred remains of human bodies. 3, maybe 4. The burning had been too thorough for a reliable count. I could identify a blackened belt buckle fused to a pelvis, the heel of a work boot melted to the sheeting, the clasp of a cheap wristwatch band embedded in what had been a forearm. Clothing remnants matched what cartel tunnel crews wore on shift. Jeans, boots, cotton work shirts. The men who had built and operated this tunnel. They had been down here when the contractor operation took over their passage, and now they were carbonized meat and bone fragment in a hole. 5-gallon accelerant containers sat stacked beside the pit. 3 empty, 2 full commercial chemical grade, ready for the next use. That's about enough sightseeing, I think. I turned with the cig raised and found 3 men filling the corridor behind me. 2 held suppressed short-barreled rifles aimed at my center mass, muzzles steady, stances professional. The third stood between them, unarmed, holding a 2-way radio in one hand and a hard-sided equipment case in the other. Tall, heavy through the chest and shoulders, clean-shaven, desert-tan tactical vest over a black compression shirt. His gear carried neither insignia nor flag patch nor name tape. His expression was unsurprised, a man whose afternoon had been rearranged by a problem he had already built a contingency for. Pruitt Neal, CBP tunnel entry, Nogales sector, badge number 74831. He read it from a tablet one of his men held out. Your vehicle's topside. Your hardline relays still at the tunnel mouth. Your surface man, Davies Anthony, has been informed that you're assisting with an interagency geological survey and will be delayed returning. He accepted that without much fuss. My surface backup thought I was measuring soil density for another department. While I stood in a room with a burning pit full of murdered men and crates of alien wreckage tagged with forged customs labels. Lower the weapon, please. I lowered it because the 2 rifles trained on my chest gave the request the weight of fact. One man stepped forward and took the cig from my hand. The other patted me down and removed my camera, my phone, and the hardline spool from my belt. 12 years of trusting the chain of command, and I was watching the links come apart in real time. My name is Beckett Sloan. The man with the equipment case spoke the way project managers speak during a site walkthrough. Measured, informational, already thinking 3 items down his list. I supervise this recovery and containment operation. What you've walked into is a 72-hour facility. In roughly 40 hours, everything in this tunnel complex gets incinerated, and the tunnel itself gets collapsed. You entered the operational window, that's the situation. He said it the way you would explain a scheduling conflict, a room double-booked by 2 departments. The men in the pit, I said. They entered the same window. Sloan crossed to a wall-mounted biometric panel beside a heavy storage door. He set the equipment case on a work table, thumbed the latches, and opened the lid. Inside, mounted in a custom-cut foam insert, sat 2 rows of severed human thumbs, each one sealed in a small clear bag. Each bag labelled with a strip of masking tape bearing a handwritten alphanumeric code. The tissue had been preserved, treated with something that held the skin taut, kept the fingerprint ridges intact, and arrested decomposition just enough to maintain the biometric pattern. Sloan selected a thumb from the second row, peeled open the bag, pressed the severed pad against the scanner. The storage door's lock disengaged with a solid, heavy click. He returned the thumb to its bag, placed it back in the foam, and closed the case. The whole sequence took maybe 8 seconds. A man swiping a keycard, a man using the right tool for a routine task. The people those thumbs belong to, I said, also inside the window. He latched the case and looked at me for the first time with something like professional assessment, measuring how much trouble I represented against whatever timeline he was operating on. Sit tight, Pruitt. I need to decide what the schedule looks like with you in it. His men walked me to a side corridor off the staging chamber. They threaded a length of black flex cuff through a wall-mounted pipe rail, cinched my wrists to it, and left me standing with my hands at chest height. The position was uncomfortable and efficient, with every ounce of drama stripped away. One guard stayed at the corridor junction with his rifle across his chest, watching the passage that led back toward the holding containers. Professional posture, relaxed grip. A man pulling a routine shift in a facility where the threats were catalogued, refrigerated, and contained. The containment breach started with a sound. Deep in the complex, past the holding area, past the surgical bay, somewhere in a section I had not reached, metal screamed. A long, tearing groan carried through the walls and floor, followed by a concussive bang that shook a ceiling-mounted cable run loose from its anchor. The bundle dropped and swung on its remaining tie. Overhead lights surged, dimmed, surged again. One of the generator circuits had taken a hit. The guard keyed his radio. "Sloan, this is Post 3. I'm hearing structural failure from the holding—" The response came fast and clipped, too low for me to catch. Whatever Sloan said wiped the routine off the guard's face. He looked at me, brief, assessing, then back at the corridor. "Stay there." He moved down the passage at a jog, rifle up, and disappeared around the bend. The flex cuff held. The pipe rail did too. The ceiling cable run had given me the peace I needed, a jagged strip of anchor bracket hanging shoulder-high from the wall. I twisted my wrists until the plastic bit deep enough to draw blood, worked the cuff against the torn bracket, sawed once, twice. The edge slipped and cut into my hand. I kept going. Automatic fire cracked from somewhere to my left. 2 controlled bursts, a third that went long and ragged, a man holding the trigger because training had given way to something older. Then came a wet, heavy impact against a hard surface, repeated twice. A human voice broke open and cut short. The flex cuff parted on the next pull. I left skin on the plastic and went the other direction. The facility was coming apart around me. Power surged and failed in sections. Corridors going dark, snapping back to red amber, going dark again. I moved by headlamp when the overheads died, by memory when the headlamp felt like a beacon. The layout was simple. Straight lines with perpendicular branches, built for utility. I headed toward the holding area because in an underground facility losing power and gaining gunfire, familiar ground is the only ground worth trusting. I passed the second shipping container. Its door was gone, torn outward off the welded brackets, the padlock hasp ripped clean from the frame with both anchor bolts still attached, trailing 6 inches of packed earth. The bolts had held. The earth had failed. Inside the container was empty. Long gouges scored the interior walls where the creature's fingers had dug in for purchase, and the metal floor sheeting was buckled in a pattern that mapped to 6 points of downward force pushing simultaneously. 20 meters past the container, I found one of Sloan's men. He was on his back in the corridor, his rifle still slung across his chest. The weapon had not been fired. Whatever hit him had come fast and from above. The ceiling conduit directly overhead was crushed. The cable bundles sheared, and the man's tactical vest had been torn open across the front in 4 parallel gouges that went through the ballistic plate beneath. The plate was rated to stop rifle rounds. It had cracked like kiln tile. The gouges continued into the ribcage underneath. His body still carried warmth. I took the rifle, checked the magazine, full, 30 rounds. I pulled 2 spare magazines from his vest pockets, shoved them in my waistband, and kept moving. Something filled the corridor ahead. I brought the rifle up and caught it in my headlamp for half a second, a shape spanning the passage from wall to wall, limbs braced against every surface, moving fast, moving away from me toward the surgical bay. The creature from the container. It was heading deeper into the facility, toward the other one. I let it go. I needed to travel the opposite direction toward the cartel tunnel, toward the steel door I had breached. But the surgical bay sat between me and that door, and the creature was heading straight for it. The security shutters that had sealed the supply corridor might still be down. I needed another route. That was when I heard voices. Human voices, muffled, coming from behind a locked steel door in a side passage I had walked past without stopping on my way through. Men speaking Spanish, their words layered over each other in a way that meant they had heard the same sounds I had. The door was bolted from the outside with a drawbar. I pulled the bar and opened it. 3 men sat inside a space maybe 3 meters square, airless except for the open door, lit by a single dead fixture. They were against the walls, dehydrated and filthy, dressed in the same work clothes I had seen as charred remnants in the burning pit. Jeans, boots, cotton shirts. The cartel tunnel crew. Men Sloan's operation had captured alive, held because they knew the tunnel system, or because Sloan had not scheduled their disposal yet. Their eyes went to the rifle first, then to my tactical vest. then to the CBP patch on my shoulder. The man closest to the door spoke first. Wiry build, mid-30s, a scar across the bridge of his nose that looked like it came from a bottle. His English was rough but workable. "You are Border Patrol. CBP, tunnel entry team." "Then you know this tunnel." "I know the main passage. 300 meters of cartel construction. I came through the US entrance." He shook his head. "The main passage is one route. There are 3 others: ventilation crawls, a drainage branch, an unfinished cut that connects to a culvert near the surface." He watched my face. "We built all of it, before these men came and took our tunnel." His name was Rudy. The other 2 were Mateo and Esteban. Mateo was older and silent, with a miner's careful hands. Esteban was younger, with a heavy burn scar on one forearm and eyes moving too fast. I told Rudy what was happening in the facility: the creatures loose, armed contractors, the burn timeline Sloan had described. He listened like a man who had spent days in a concrete box, waiting to learn how he was going to die, and had just been offered a worse alternative. "The ventilation crawl," he said. "It connects to a lateral shaft, maybe 40 meters. Comes up near a drainage easement on the US side. Belly crawl tight, no room to turn around, but it reaches the surface." "Show me." He stood. The other 2 stood with him. Nobody discussed terms or made promises about what happened after. We were all underground, all unarmed except for me, and the only currency that mattered was knowing which direction the air came from. Rudy took us through a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the main passage, a narrow service route the cartel crew had used during construction. Rough-cut earth walls reinforced with angle iron, ceiling low enough to scrape my back at the cross-bracing. Rudy moved through it from memory, turning at junctions I could not see until I was on top of them, counting paces under his breath. Behind us, automatic weapons fire broke into 3 controlled bursts, then a 4th that stretched ragged and long. A heavy crash followed, then the sound I had heard before, wet concussive impacts against a hard surface, something powerful hitting construction built for human-scale forces. A man's cry rose and ended mid-breath. We reached the junction where the ventilation crawl branched off. Rudy stopped. The shaft entrance was there, a rough opening in the earth wall, maybe half a meter high, timber-braced, the kind of emergency escape route cartel diggers cut during construction. It was partially collapsed. Dirt and broken timber filled the lower third. The air moving through the gap was hot, carrying a dry chemical bitterness that meant fire somewhere on the other side. The disposal section. The accelerant containers beside the burning pit. If those jugs had caught, the fire would travel through the ventilation network. Rudy crouched at the opening and dug at the rubble with his hands. The earth was loose but deep. Behind the blockage, the crawl space was dark and growing hotter. Esteban broke from the group. He backed into the junction, looked left toward the gunfire, and called out in Spanish. He offered his position, identified himself, explained in rapid, desperate bursts that he knew where the CBP agent was and would bring them straight to me in exchange for release. He was bargaining the way a man bargains with anyone holding a weapon when the only thing he has to trade is somebody else. He got 6 steps down the corridor. The shot was suppressed, a flat crack that barely carried past the junction walls. Esteban folded sideways, hit the ground, and stayed there. Sloan's cleanup protocol had no negotiation clause. Mateo saw it happen. His face changed once, all at once, and then he went past me into the dark of the maintenance corridor without a word. He took the unfinished cut, moving fast, abandoning the crawl, the main tunnel, and us. Rudy let him go. 10 seconds later, from somewhere down the side passage, Mateo cried out. The sound rose, struck a hard stop, and vanished into the earth. Rudy pulled his hands out of the dirt and looked at me. "The crawl is choked," he said, "and the fire is feeding in from the other side." "The main tunnel," I said. "The cartel passage I came through. Past the surgery room, past the containers. I know where it is." He wiped his palms on his jeans. "Then we go past." We backtracked through the maintenance corridor and cut across to the main facility passage. Power had stabilized in this section. Red-amber lighting, the generator circuit still holding. But the air was different, warmer. The fire from the disposal area was bleeding into the ventilation system, and the whole complex was heating from the inside. The surgical bay door was open. What I saw inside stopped me for 3 full seconds, and in a facility burning down around us, 3 seconds was expensive. The freed creature, the one from the shipping container, was in the surgical bay. It stood over the operating tables, 6 limbs braced against the floor and the table frames, working at the nylon webbing that held the surgical patient down. 2 arms pulled at restraints. 2 gripped table edges for leverage. The remaining 2 cradled the restrained creature's head, long, slate-colored fingers wrapped around the jaw and the base of the skull in a grip that carried a care I had not expected and could not look away from. The patient was half free. 3 of the 8 restraint points had been torn loose, and its upper arms had come off the table surface, bandaged limbs reaching for the one above it. The lower body was still strapped. As the freed creature pulled, the patient's torso shifted and the surgical dressings tore open. I saw what the contractors had been doing. They had been cutting. Layers of tissue had been separated and pinned back with surgical retractors still clamped in place, metal instruments anchored into living anatomy, holding folds of translucent skin away from structures beneath that had no human equivalent. Organs, if the word applied, were arranged along the creature's central axis in a vertical configuration. Each one connected to its neighbors by dense bundles of tubular tissue that contracted in slow, visible waves, driving blue-black fluid through a circulatory system mapped with surgical marker directly on the skin. Notation in English. Arrows, labels, numbered reference points written in felt tip on the body of a living being still breathing around the instruments holding it open. The freed creature turned its head toward the doorway. Those wide-set, dark eyes locked on me with a focused intensity I understood immediately as threat assessment. It was deciding whether we stood between it and the way out. We did not. The corridor to the cartel tunnel lay past the surgical bay on the far side of the chamber. The security shutter that had sealed the supply route earlier hung half-raised now, jammed in its track by the power failure. Beneath it, the passage beyond was open. "Along the wall," I told Rudy. "Keep wide of the tables." We circled right, backs to the wall, moving around the perimeter of the bay. The freed creature watched us with its 2 eyes. The anatomy allowed for that. The head turning only part way while the gaze tracked us across the room, and kept working at the restraints with the arms that were not braced for violence. We cleared the far door. The corridor beyond led toward the supply alcoves, toward the steel pressure door I had breached hours ago, toward the cartel tunnel and the surface. Behind us, the last restraint gave. The nylon snapped, and I heard the surgical patient's body shift on the table. Retractors and clamps that had been anchored in its open torso clattered to the concrete as they fell free. 2 clamps remained embedded, dragging bright threads of blue-black fluid as the creature tried to move. Rudy and I ran. The supply corridor was wrecked, surgical kits knocked to the floor, storage alcoves torn open by something moving through too fast or too large. Ahead, the steel pressure door still stood open, showing the dark mouth of the cartel tunnel beyond. From this side, the construction change was stark, clean concrete giving way to packed earth and plywood. Sloane's voice hit the PA system, distorted by failing speakers but clear enough. "All teams, initiate burn. Code Meridian. All personnel to surface access. Repeat, initiate burn." Thermite. Sloane was collapsing the timeline. A second transmission came through a dropped radio lying on the corridor floor. A handheld channel, clearer. "Surface team, seal the primary tunnel. North entrance, collapse it. Do it now." I heard it. Rudy heard it. The tunnel entrance, The shaft behind the ranch shed where Tony Davies had been sitting in a CBP truck that morning was being sealed from the surface while we were still underground. We ran harder. 30 meters from the steel door, a mercenary stepped out of a side passage. He saw me, saw the rifle, and fired. The round hit the wall beside my head and peppered my cheek and ear with concrete fragments. I fired back. 3 rounds, 2 into the wall and 1 that caught him in the upper leg and dropped him. Rudy was behind me. The mercenary, on the floor, shifted his rifle toward Rudy and fired twice. Both rounds hit center mass. Rudy went down hard against the corridor wall. He pressed both hands over his stomach where the bullets had gone in and looked at me with an expression that was pure arithmetic. A man counting what he had and coming up short. I put a round into the mercenary's rifle and jammed the action. He rolled into the side passage. I knelt beside Rudy. How far to the bend in the main tunnel? He understood what I was asking. He understood that I was already gone. 60 meters to the bend, 80 to the incline. The ceiling drops where the soil gets soft. Stay to the right side at the curve. The left has a false floor. We lost a digger there during construction. He gave me the tunnel the way a man gives directions to a place he knows he will never visit again. Distances, hazards, the things that would kill me if I forgot them. I gripped his shoulder for 1 second because I owed him that much. Then I left him sitting against the wall in a corridor filling with heat. I went through the steel door and into the cartel tunnel. Darkness. The facility's lighting ended at the threshold. My headlamp cut white into the passage. Plywood walls, railroad ties overhead, the dryer duct along the ceiling. The air was still cooler here, but the margin was closing. Heat bled through the steel door behind me, and I could hear the facility's collapse accelerating, generators overloading, conduit popping, the deep, structural groan of concrete expanding under thermal stress. I moved at a crouch run, following the passage north. Rudy's distances in my head, 60 meters to the bend, 80 to the incline, stay right at the curve. At 30 meters, I heard something behind me. A dragging sound, rhythmic, effortful, accompanied by the scrape of hard surfaces against the tunnel walls. I stopped, turned my headlamp back. The surgical patient. The alien from the operating tables. It had come through the steel door and was pulling itself into the cartel tunnel. Its lower limbs, the ones the surgeons had kept strapped, connected to the torso section they had opened and pinned and charted with marker, dragged behind it, dead weight, bearing nothing. The upper 4 arms did the work. They gripped the tunnel walls and ceiling, bracing, pulling, hauling the ruined body forward in a lurching crawl that used the confined space the way a climber uses a chimney. Every surface was a handhold, every wall a brace point. The creature filled the tunnel from side to side, its limbs spanning the full width and height. I had nowhere to pass, nowhere to step aside. If it caught me, the strength that had cracked a ballistic plate would do the same to my ribs. Blue-black fluid trailed behind it in a continuous smear on the packed earth. The opened section of its torso was visible in my headlamp. That vertical chain of organs, the tubular connectors, the interior of a body cut open and left to function around the damage. Bandages on its upper arms hung in sodden strips, trailing from limbs that gripped and released, driving it forward with grinding persistence. It was escaping the fire. So was I. 15 meters behind me. Tunnel 1.5 meters wide. I turned and ran. The bend came where Rudy said it would. I stayed right. The ceiling dropped. I went to hands and knees, scrambling over packed earth that was damp and loose, the structural integrity degrading. The rifle snagged twice on the tunnel wall. I dragged it by the sling until the sling caught on a splintered brace, then tore it free and kept moving. Behind me, the creature's movement changed. It slowed, then stopped entirely. I looked back. A wave of heat from the burning facility had reached this section, warm air pushing through the passage like breath through a straw. The alien had gone rigid. Every limb locked, body pressed against the walls. Frozen. Some deep biological override had triggered from heat or chemical signature or both. The same stillness I had seen in the container when the warm vent coughed into its enclosure. A response that said, "Stop, hold, wait for it to pass." I gained ground, 20 meters, 30. The heat wave faded as the tunnel's own temperature pushed back. Behind me, the creature resumed its crawl. The pattern held. Heat arrived in waves as the facility burned, each surge stronger and longer. Every spike froze the alien in place. Every retreat set it moving again. I crawled in the gaps, 10 meters, 15, hauling the rifle I could not fire in that space, my knees raw on packed earth, soil in my mouth, the headlamp bouncing off plywood and dirt. The tunnel narrowed. The ceiling sagged. I could hear the creature behind me, that relentless scraping drag, closing the distance each time the air cooled. 80 meters, the incline. The tunnel rose toward the surface, steep enough that my boots slipped in the dirt. The air was warmer from above now, surface heat, or the tunnel entrance compromised. I saw daylight 20 meters ahead, narrow, choked with dirt and broken timber. Sloane's surface team had dropped a charge on the tunnel mouth. The collapse was incomplete. The desert soil was loose and dry, and the blast had caved the upper portion of the shaft without fully sealing the passage. A gap remained at the bottom, half a meter wide, packed with loose earth and splintered plywood. I dug, both hands in the dirt, pulling soil toward me, shoving it down the slope behind me. The gap widened inch by inch. Below and behind, I could hear the creature on the incline, still dragging, still coming. The gap opened. I pushed the rifle through, then my head and shoulders, and hauled the rest of my body out with my arms. Bright sun, dry desert air, gravel under my palms. I was on my stomach behind the collapsed ranch shed. The surveyor's flag was still standing. The sky was the deep cloudless blue of an Arizona afternoon. For a few seconds, the only sound was my own breathing and the tick of settling rubble around the tunnel mouth. I got to my feet. My CBP truck was where I had left it, 50 meters up the access road. Tony Davies's truck was gone, recalled to sector, probably, sent home by whoever had fed him the geological survey story. I reached my truck, keyed the CBP radio. "Dispatch, this is Pruitt, tunnel entry, badge 74831. Emergency report on the tunnel site east of Nogales. I need tactical response and I need to speak with sector command." "Copy, Pruitt." The dispatcher was calm. "Confirm your position and stand by. A response team is en route." "Dispatch, there are armed contractors at this site. I need..." "Confirmed. Team is en route. 12 minutes. Stay with your vehicle." They already knew where I was. They had already dispatched a team before I picked up the radio. I waited by the truck with the dead mercenary's rifle across my chest. Behind me, from the collapsed tunnel mouth, came scraping. One slate-colored hand came through the dirt, gripped the edge of the collapse and pulled. A second hand. A third. The alien dragged itself out of the earth and lay in the desert gravel, its ruined lower body trailing behind, its open torso pressed against the hot ground. It breathed in the sunlight, shuddering, labored expansions of that broad chest, and those dark, wet eyes still open, turned toward the sky. It lay there in the gravel and the sun and breathed, gaze fixed upward. 12 minutes. 3 vehicles arrived on the dirt road, trailing dust. 2 unmarked black SUVs and a white government sedan. Their lights stayed dark. Their bodies carried no agency markings. The men from the SUVs wore contractor tactical gear with hidden branding. They carried field restraints built for a body with more than 4 limbs. Wide nylon harnesses with multiple attachment loops, custom engineered, brought specifically for this. They had known what was coming out of the tunnel before I called dispatch. The third man from the sedan wore a pressed shirt and khakis and the careful anonymous appearance of a federal liaison whose name appears on carefully restricted rosters. He walked toward me carrying a tablet and a manila folder. "Agent Pruitt, I'm here to handle your debrief. Who are you with? I'm the person handling your debrief. He opened the folder. Here's what the record shows. At 06:45 this morning, you were assigned to a tunnel clearance at this site. At 0800, the tunnel experienced a structural failure during pre-demolition survey. The failure caused a partial collapse. You exited safely. Army Corps has been notified that demolition is complete. That's not what happened. That's what happened. He said it without weight or emphasis. A statement of administrative fact. Your surface man, Davies, will confirm he was released from the site at 0730 after you reported stable conditions via hardline. Your partner, Agent Meacham, will confirm he was on administrative assignment at Mariposa all day. The tunnel's pre-demo survey was filed yesterday, backdated, signed, logged in the system. You were never inside past the mapped section. Lyle had been moved before I ever reached the ranch shed. Tony had been released before I came back out. The report had been filed before I went underground. They had not covered the incident after it happened. They had built the cover around the possibility that someone might survive it. Behind us, the contractor team had reached the alien. They worked like men who had done this before. Harness around the torso, restraint loops on each limb. A stretcher frame that accommodated the body's proportions without improvisation. The creature lay still. It stayed in the gravel while human hands strapped it down for the second time in its life on this planet, and its dark eyes tracked the men above it the way it had tracked me in the surgical bay. Recording, measuring, understanding at whatever depth its biology allowed that it was being taken again. They loaded it into the back of an SUV. The doors closed. The vehicle pulled away down the dirt road and was gone. The liaison handed me 2 items from the folder. A printed commendation letter, CBP meritorious service for a narcotics interdiction last month, pre-signed by a sector chief I had never heard of, and a plain white business card bearing a single phone number. The commendation goes in your personnel file today. If anyone asks about your activities, that's your answer. The phone number is yours to keep. If you are contacted by anyone, press, internal affairs, inspector general, congressional staff, about tunnels east of Nogales, you call that number before you say a single word to anyone. That is the only instruction I'm going to give you. And if I don't? The liaison closed the folder. Agent Pruitt, you entered a 72-hour operational window. You're the first person to come out the other end of one. He let that settle. I'd recommend you think carefully about why that is and what it cost the people who made that decision. He got in the sedan. He drove away. I stood in the desert beside my truck until the dust from the last vehicle faded. The collapsed tunnel mouth had gone quiet. The facility was still burning somewhere beneath the gravel. Sloan's thermite eating through the surgical bay, the holding containers, the evidence crates with their fake customs labels, the operating tables, the pit where the tunnel builders had been reduced to belt buckles and boot heels. By tomorrow, 100 feet of Arizona soil would bury everything that had happened down there. Sloan was alive somewhere, driving to the next site, or filing the paperwork that closed this one, or adding a new line to whatever ledger tracked the people who had entered his operational windows. His case of severed thumbs rode with him, sorted and labelled, each one a door key cut from a body that would never be found. I got in my truck. My hands were coated in dried blue-black fluid that had crusted under my fingernails and darkened every crease in my knuckles. The steering wheel leather stained where I gripped it. The commendation letter sat on the passenger seat. I drove back to the sector office. The business card stayed in my shirt pocket, the number undialed, and I understood that this was the kind of defiance that only lasts until the next time someone asks a question I am supposed to answer with a lie. Somewhere on a highway I would never identify, in a vehicle I would never trace. The creature from the operating tables was being driven toward its next facility. Strapped down. Opened up. charted with marker on its own skin by men whose names appeared only where the public would never look. And 30 meters from a steel door in a burning tunnel, Rudy sat against a corridor wall with his hands on his stomach, giving directions to a surface he would never see.